Welcome to both of you. Halima, let me start with you. What are you hearing about the UAE and this possibility of increases in production? Are these rumors credible? And what would that increase in production mean, first for Europe and then for the world?
I mean, U.S. officials are confident that the UAE is poised at the next OPEC meeting to push for an OPEC increase beyond the 400,000 barrels a day month increase they're doing right now. But the big question is, UAE has some spare capacity, not a lot. The big question is, we have not heard from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia yet. And it is Saudi Arabia that's sitting on the most spare capacity. They are the only one in OPEC that can really surge production over 1 million barrels. And so we still need to wait to see, what is Saudi Arabia going to do? Is President Biden going to make that phone call to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, potentially visit the kingdom? Is there going to be some new type of reset in the U.S.-Saudi relationship? UAE is important, but it is not enough. You do need Saudi Arabia participating in a major production increase. You mentioned that they would be willing to go there at a next OPEC meeting. How soon is that? And then presuming OPEC is willing to move its production quotas up, how soon could that begin to be felt in global markets, Halima? I mean, the next meeting is on March 31st. They can have emergency meetings, so they do not have to wait till the end of March. Saudi Arabia could potentially bring on, over 1 million barrels in 30 to 60 days. I mean, they think they have potentially 2 million barrels they can put onto this market. UAE, Kuwait, we're talking about a couple 100,000 out of those countries. So again, UAE is important, but Saudi Arabia remains the country we need. They are the central banker of oil. Now, I expect we're going to potentially get an announcement on Venezuela that will be lifting sanctions on Venezuela, potentially a couple 100,000 additional barrels of Venezuelan production hitting the market. But again, if we are still thinking about a 3 to 4 million barrel hole from Russia, you need more than UAE. You need more than Venezuela. You absolutely need Saudi Arabia. And again, I think the market is getting ahead of itself, believing that we are getting an imminent diplomatic off-ramp to the situation in Ukraine. There's no signs yet that Vladimir Putin is prepared to pull back his military forces in Ukraine.
Kevin, what would you add to that, and what would you tell investors here?
Well, there's another thing that we're still talking about, which is yesterday's sanctions. Obviously, we had a lot of run up in the expectation they might have been bigger than they were. Substitution versus supplementation. If it goes into storage somewhere else, disappears from the market, and it's the entirety of Russian crude, it's a big deal. If it's U.S. oil and it's not being U.S. purchases of Russian oil and they're going somewhere else, it's not. Some of that probably is behind this too. There's an OPEC story that Halima mentioned. This is I guess today's oil wordle is probably spare. It's got an S, a P, and an R in it, but it's not the SPR. That spare capacity is really a big deal for buffering the market. But another part of that story is that if the OPEC plus bargain falls apart because they can't stay in agreement on cuts, then all the oil rushes back to market right away. So you sort of have an oil war scenario like we saw in March, April 2020, and flat out spare capacity comes back to market. That would be much more bearish. I think that would also be irrationally exuberant to expect at this point.